We're continuing looking at multiplying polynomials, and we're going to see some shortcuts here. So there are some special patterns that take place when you multiply, and although it isn't technically necessary to memorize these patterns, it just comes from seeing them over and over. People began to notice that there were these patterns that occurred. So, and let me just take you through it here. So if you didn't want to memorize that this is a pattern, what you're doing here is I'm just multiplying the same thing times itself. Isn't that what a square means? So I could FOIL this through. Now, what happens though, which is interesting, is when you send it through, someone noticed that this is always what happens. So instead of memorizing this, if you don't want to, you could just see, you could literally FOIL this out on all of these in this section. Now, someone noticed this pattern that you always get 2 of the middle. And now the reason it's faster to multiply if you recognize this pattern, it's also going to help us with factoring, where we would have a polynomial that we want to take apart. So recognizing these patterns is helpful. But again, at least on the multiplying side of things, you don't have to. You could just FOIL it out. But so someone kept noticing that they would continually get the same 2 of the same middle, which of course if you think about the logic, of course that's going to happen. So they memorized the pattern, and what they saw here was, if you start with this, here's what you can do. Square the front, square the back, and it's -8, so that would be +64. So I squared the front and the back. So I've got the same thing multiplied by itself. Square the front, square the back. Now it's always going to be 2 of the middle guys multiplied together. So if you multiply these together, you'd get -24x. It's always going to be 2 of those. So you could think of it as just multiplying that by 2. Or you could just do it once and then double it. So I've got -48x. So someone recognized this pattern. It'll be helpful when we try to take polynomials like this apart the other direction, which I'm sure you've done in the past when you factor these. But so I'm going to show you the shortcut just so you get used to it. So this, if I recognize this pattern, it's the same thing times itself. I'm going to square the front. I'm going to square the back. Now it's -1 squared, so that's going to be a +1. Now if I multiply the two numbers together, I'm going to get -4x. Do you see -1 times 4x? I'm going to get -4x. 2 of those would be -8x. So this pattern always happens that way. Now there's another one called the difference of squares. And what we're going to have here is that you have a plus and a minus. Now someone FOILed these out. And when they FOILed them out, they saw that because of all the numbers are the same, but you have those opposite signs, the middle term always would fall out every time. And so the shortcut, instead of FOILing it, was I'm going to multiply the first 2. I'm going to multiply the back 2. And it's going to always take a negative sign. So it'd be a +4 and -4. It's always going to make a negative on these. And then there's no middle term. Because I know, like I could FOIL it out, but if I did 100 of these by FOILing it out, the middle would always just disappear because one would have a positive and one would have a negative. So if I'm looking at this, because I see the same numbers with opposite signs, I know it's this. I don't have to worry about that 14x that's made here because I also make a -14x. They'll always cancel each other out. Okay, now if we want to multiply, this here's a binomial. It's got 2 pieces versus a trinomial. It's got 3. Nothing changes. We're just going to send them through. We're just going to send them to more places. So what I mean is x is going to go to 3x, 3x squared. X is going to go to -2y, -2xy. Now I put the 2 in front just because that's the convention and we tend to put the x's first. Now x times 5, +5x. Okay, let's go on the back end. I've got 12x, -8y. Just sending the 4 through now to everybody. Okay, now let's just check to see if we have any like terms. They have to be identical. It looks like these are my only two. Am I right? Yeah. So an xy is not the same as anyone else, so nothing else can be combined there. So I've got 3x squared, 5x's, and 12x's, 17x's, and that's all that can go together. So pause if you want to try. I'm going to send him through. Now I'm sending that -1 through. And I get this. Now once again, these look like my only two terms I can combine. So -27 and -2, -29. And there we go. Okay, that was short and sweet. So hopefully this is easy for you. Again, these patterns, it's helpful if this, especially with this being all that we're doing in this section, it would be really good if you just start to see that these patterns create these. So use the patterns. It would be helpful, especially when we do a refresher on factoring.